So, good evening, and thank you for joining us. It's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's guest, Richard Heydarian, an academic and columnist who previously served as policy advisor to the Philippine House of Representatives, has published widely on Philippine politics and geopolitics in the Greater Asia region, and he just published his second book entitled The Rise of Duterte, a populist revolt against elite democracy. It's a very interesting book. I just finished reading it as well. So we're excited to have him here tonight to offer his expertise on this timely topic. Richard, welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right.
It's my third book, by the way, single book. Yeah.
Okay. So let's begin by discussing your book basically puts the rise of Duterte within the context of this populism that is has arisen abroad, and also in terms of emerging democracies, emerging markets. So, do you want to talk a little about that context and how perhaps that, in what way is that symptomatic of a global trend?
Right. I mean, there's a lot of journalistic coverage of Duterte. He's very much called as Trump of the East. Although I say chronologically, Trump should be called Duterte of the West because Duterte won first, right? So there's a lot of journalistic coverage. There's a lot of psychoanalysis going on about Duterte. So I thought it's best what to do is to see how there are broader structural forces in place here, not only in the case of the Philippines, but among what I call emerging market democracies. There has been a great range of books. Judy's book, for instance, The Populist Explosion, that looks at rise of populism in the West, including here in the United States. But if you look at populism in the West, one big factor is immigration. Right. That's why even in Nordic countries when the economy is doing well, whether it's Netherlands or Sweden, among others, you still see the rise of populism. So you know that immigration is one big factor there. When it comes to emerging market democracy, immigration is a non-issue. If anything, there's emigration. You know, Indians and Filipinos are all over the world. Indonesia is a major exporter of labor. You go to Germany, certain places, you're essentially inside Turkey, right? So the four countries that really got my attention, I've been studying, I spent time in the Middle East, I spent time in East Asia a lot, is I felt there's something interesting happening here. You know, starting with some more controversial figure like Ahmadinejad, the Iranian president in the past, and later on you have Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. You know, these people were democratically elected.
Right.
You know, they won in competitive elections. At least Ahmadinejad during his first term, and in the case of Erdogan in Turkey, which is a much more democratic country. Then in the past few years, also something interesting has happened. In India, you have someone called Narendra Modi, who became the Prime Minister of India. And, you know, all of these guys essentially ran on an anti-establishment platform. So Erdogan ran against the so-called laik, westernized elite of the People's Republican Party. He presented himself as the voice of the pious Turks. In the case of Modi, he is essentially putting forward a Hindu nationalist message and saying, I'm against the Congress Party and their kind of elitist message. And of course, it didn't help that Rahul Gandhi and all of them had European descent. They were European ancestry. And then, of course, even in Indonesia, something very interesting happened. I've been watching Jokowi with a lot of interest. Some would identify him as a left-wing populist, a much more progressive version, if you use Ernesto Lacau's definition of populism. But one thing that really got my attention in 2014 was the fight between Jokowi and Prabowo Subianto. So, as you know, Prabowo Subianto was someone who was accused of a lot of human rights violation, and he could still become the president. He's most likely going to run in 2018. He was the speaker in our conference in Jakarta just a few weeks ago. You know, so Jokowi and Prabowo, you put them together, it kind of also sounds like, you know, Modi and Erdogan. Because even Jokowi presented himself as an outside-the-box candidate against the Jakarta elite and oligarchy. So I felt if you look at Duterte, he's not very dissimilar from all of these guys I've been talking about. Most of these guys come from local government experience. In the case of Erdogan, Istanbul mayor. In the case of Modi, Gujarat. In the case of Jokowi, Sulu. In the case of Duterte, Davao. And when they ran for office, they talk about how they'll make their local government model the new model for national development. The Gujarat model, the Sulu model, the Davao model. So I felt this similarity is something that someone has to pay more attention to. And in fact, that's going to be my next major project, really four-country study. Okay. So I felt, you know, you cannot understand Duterte unless you look at the dynamics inside emerging markets, and I'll be very quick about this, I'm sorry. And what really surprises me is that these are countries who have been growing very fast
Right.
and have some history of democratic elections. So isn't it surprising that suddenly more and more people in these countries, based on surveys, are preferring autocracy? In Philippines, in a Pew survey, 50% of people said they prefer autocracy.
Right.
60% of people in one survey said that they're fine with their leaders not bothering with elections anymore. So something is going on here, and that something is one thing that we can talk about more later on, yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So, jumping off from what you just said, that there seems to be a general trend where there's a preference for autocracy. So, there are a couple of questions there that I want to raise to you. Is it because the underlying institutions of those new democracies, those are actually the problems rather than democracy itself, where you have in a lot of places corruption,
Right.
institutional malaise, if not inertia, and and um, and also you have this issue of the political culture. You mentioned in one of your um, uh, articles that Filipinos are a forgiving electorate,
Yeah.
right? We tend to uh, give a lot of leeway to our presidents. So, so three questions: is it the institutional legacies and other the political culture that is underlying all of these different movements, and couple that with the growing inequity? Because as you had mentioned, the Philippines had been growing really well, like 6% under the previous administration. Yet the paradox is the anti-establishment candidate won,
Right.
and partly that's because of the large economic inequality between the people.
Yeah.
So, are these some of the things that are going on here in terms of legacies? And let me add one more thing. Sorry, and was democracy also oversold?
Right.
Where here, democracy, it will solve all your problems, while we forget all of these
Right.
paths that we have. So,
Well, I mean, the book is a scholarly work, so
Right.
it really draws on a wide range of thinkers, from Hannah Arendt in the middle to Antonio Gramsci. I actually start with Antonio Gramsci's his idea that the old order is dying and new order is yet to be born, so you're still in this kind of twilight zone. But one thinker that I felt was very useful, someone that the left doesn't like too much, is Samuel Huntington. I don't like his last two books, to be honest, but I think his first books were good, which is the opposite of Fukuyama, his protege. His books are becoming progressively better over time since the end of history. So if you look at 1968 book, Political Order in Changing Societies, there was a very interesting argument Huntington was making. It got misinterpreted or misused by technocrats like Suharto's technocrats to justify autocratic modernization. My interpretation is different. I think Huntington was onto something when he said it is precisely the rapidly growing post-colonial countries that are most vulnerable to autocratic relapse. Why? Because when the economy is growing, this is also where you're going to have an exponential increase in expectations of the
Right.
people. You're going to have an increase in terms of social mobilization. But the problem is that state institutions, they do not grow exponentially in terms of their capacity. If anything, they reach some sort of deadlock or paralysis. Case in point, just look at the traffic in Manila or Jakarta, even Istanbul to a certain extent, although Istanbul has a better infrastructure. It got worse over the past few years. So in the past 5 or 6 years, more Filipinos can afford cars, loan is easier to get, but the roads are not being built fast enough. So now you have these terrible traffic congestions. Then you have elements of the previous administration saying, well, this is what you get because of success. This is because of prosperity, which was not the best way to put it, right?
Yes.
But it's actually true. The reality is that you have a gap between exponential increase in expectations and demand for supply of public services, but the state institutions are not catching up. And in that gap, you have what you call grievance politics. And I think people like Rodrigo Duterte, many people forget, the top two positions went to almost outside the box
Right,
candidates.
exactly.
Duterte won, landslide, no question, the presidency. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., the sole son of the former dictator, is now in the Cemetery of National Heroes, so I don't know how to call him, our hero, our dictator.
former president.
He almost became the president, the
Right.
son, and he can still become the vice president. He can still become the vice president. There's a pending case at the Supreme Court. My expectation is that it's a 50-50, probably it's a 60-40 for Bongbong Marcos. So you have two major outside the box candidates making very good use of this gap between rising expectations and inefficacy of the government to deal with these problems. Now, the other thing is, you're right, there was overpromise. I think President Aquino, if you look at certain metrics, was possibly the most successful post-Marcos or most successful modern Filipino president. If you just look like, for instance, average GDP growth. Average GDP growth was 6.3, 6.4%, which is twice more than Marcos, significantly more than his mother and other presidents in the country. But as the music says, the best is not good enough. In fact, it was precisely with the growth under Aquino that people realized how shallow prosperity is, how hollow the Philippine democracy is, and that's where I provide numbers. You know, to be honest, I don't compare Philippines much with Southeast Asia. I feel more at home with Latinos because I feel when I watch Narcos, it kind of reminds me of Philippines. But in terms of the haciendero culture and corruption and all of that, and womanizing leaders and all of that. No, I mean, if you compare the Philippines even to Latin America, the level of inequality and concentration of growth and power is mind-boggling. In Mexico, 40% of the legislature is dominated by so-called political dynasties. In Argentina, it's 10%. In Philippines, it's 70%. In some 70%, this is people of same family name. So I had a Russian diplomat telling me 5 years ago, he said, I don't understand your democracy. I go and look at the name of the officials, De La Cruz, De La Cruz, De La Cruz, and then there's a Reyes. And I call, who is this Reyes? Oh, he's the son-in-law of the De La Cruz guy. So,
Of course.
the numbers are mind-boggling. You know, 178 political dynasties essentially control 73 out of 81 provinces. That's why I'm scared of federalism, because federalism could mean essentially creation of fiefdoms. You'll have little kings completely controlling their states. You have political dynasty everywhere, including Clinton's, but the degree is just mind-boggling. Economic growth. Thailand is essentially in a civil war situation right now because of the concentration of growth. But in Thailand, the 40 richest families took home 30% of growth, newly created growth. In the Philippines, 40 families alone took home 76% of the 6%. So 5 out of 6% went to just 0.0001% of the population. So if you're an ordinary Filipino, an aspirational middle class, you see these beautiful skyscrapers emerging in global Bonifacio City in Makati. Then you see this sea and ocean of slums and poverty around. And you feel the future does not belong to you. And that is where Dutertes of the world come into the picture.
So from there are a couple of things. First, and this was raised in a conference 2 weeks ago in Columbia University where I was. And what has changed and what has not changed in Philippine politics? Because on the one hand, yes, you have this very populist leader, very, let me say, frank and open about his comments and his way of thinking. And but he seems different. He does. His the way he talks, etc., is very different, and that can also be refreshing for some people, right? No, well, especially since it's been dominated by people from the north, where now you have someone from Mindanao, and Mindanao has always accused Luzon and of colonizing, like imperial Manila, right? So, but at the same time, you have Duterte, who is himself a product, more or less, of a political dynasty. His father, his relatives. So, in that sense, what has changed and what has not changed, and to add to that, if some of you don't know that, or maybe a lot of you know, the vice president is from a different party because that's how we elect them according to our constitution. And she's Leni Robredo, who is more of a human rights activist. So on the one hand, a lot of people voted for Duterte, who's populist and have this, interesting personality. And then you have Leni Robredo, who is markedly different. Of course, depending on how the Supreme Court decides on the ruling on the results of the votes. But you have Leni Robredo, who is pro-human rights, pro-democracy. So, as you said, are we kind of in an in-between place? And also, what has not changed?
Well, very quickly on this Leni Robredo thing, remember, she also came from Bicol, from the margins of the society. Yes, her husband was a mayor, a big person, but both Duterte and Leni Robredo were actually projected as authentic outside the box candidates too. So Leni Robredo was not seen as part of really the establishment Liberal Party. She was really seen as this kind of human rights activist. She was a congressman who became vice president.
Right.
Duterte went from mayor to president. So in a way, there are very different personally speaking, but in terms of the aura that they have, they were both seen as outsiders.
Okay.
So I think that's one thing we have to keep in mind. But very quickly on this, I mean, Duterte is of course unique, even by Philippine standards. In many ways. He's being compared a lot to Marcos and Erap, the former dictator
Right.
Marcos and former populist Erap, but he's different from both of them. Marcos was extremely articulate, sophisticated. You know, I mean, I come from the north. He's that kind of guy.
Yes.
Duterte definitely is what you call a populist, because as Benjamin Moffat, for instance, says in his latest book, one thing that sets you apart as a populist is bad manners. And bad manners is your way of saying, I don't follow the rules of the game. I'm not part of the establishment. I'm one of you. And in fact, it took me some time to realize what bad manners really meant. You see, we academics, journalists among others, when we speak, there's a logical progression. There's a premise, there's an argument, there's a conclusion, there's a moderation. But you talk to a lot of so-called ordinary people, they don't follow that pattern. So Duterte actually speaks like ordinary people, or at least he comes off as speaking like ordinary people. Essentially, what I call his speeches are a stream of consciousness, like one of the characters in Faulkner's Sound and Fury, or what Freud would call open association. Just tell whatever comes to your brain. So I literally got a migraine of covering his first State of the Nation address on national TV. I had 12 pages of notes. I absolutely did not see the connection of that. So essentially, I had to redo what a logical speech should have looked
Right.
like. And actually, he always has a prepared speech and says, this is boring, blah, blah, blah. So he gives commentariat on his own prepared speech. I don't like this. Let's just talk, right? And people appreciate that because a lot of ordinary people do not speak like us.
Right.
They're not trained like us. So that's where he projects authenticity. The other thing that is unique about Duterte is that, unlike Arab Estrada, his base is much more diversified.
Right.
And this is where the opposition should not be so happy about, ousting him. He's not another Estrada, because Joseph Estrada, he became a president. He's a former B-movie actor, kind of a Reagan was a better version, of course. Womanizer, all of that. But he said, I'm one of the poor. I'm going to fight for the poor. I'm kind of like a Robin Hood. And literally, he was corrupt. He was a convicted plunderer. And so his base was the urban poor and the rural poor. Duterte's base is way more diversified. In fact, it's among the ABC class, the richest of the rich Filipinos, and aspirational middle class, where he had the highest proportional support.
Right.
So essentially, this is what Duterte said. He told the rising Filipino middle class and the rich that crime is a problem. We know where crime probably comes from the lower rungs of the society. I'm going to keep you safe from them. He goes to the poor and says, hey, I speak like you. I'm one of you. In fact, one of the slogans in his elections was, atento pre. He's one of us, pal, right? And he says, don't worry, we're going to get rid of these oligarchs. The term oligarchs, which you always hear in Russia, among others, is now a common term you see with taxi drivers using in the Philippines. Then he goes to the Visayas and Mindanaos and tells them, these arrogant imperial Manila people, just like how Trump attacks the cosmopolitan East Coast, West Coast people, we're going to get rid of this. So he gave little thing to every section of the society. He makes everyone believe. And in cognitive science, when you analyze voting, most people don't have red lines. Even if they don't like you on issue A, if you say issue B that is close to your heart, they'll vote you. So for instance, a woman says, I don't like his, misogynist language, but I like his tough anti-crime stance.
Right.
A guy says, I don't like his tough anti-crime stance, but I like his federalism. So he was very good in terms of giving something to every section of society. And in the Philippines, strange first past the post plurality. All you need to do is just to get more vote from anyone else. And he got 41% of the votes. 39.5% of the votes, I'm sorry. So that was just good enough for him to win elections. The other thing is that his opponents underestimated him until it was too late. So I sometimes say, the Catholic part of me says, maybe God really wanted this to happen. It's like, because until the last month of the election, the top three candidates were essentially killing each other, and just Duterte came from behind. And all of them had skeletons in the closet. And the difference with people like Trump or Duterte is that they say, we never pretended to be saints anyway. So if you find something dirty about us, so what? But when you find something dirty about someone who claims to be a saint, then they're in trouble. And Duterte immediately went after each and every one of his opponents, and he did a fantastic job. Last thing I want to say is social media.
Yeah.
Social media was never such a huge factor in Philippines. Maybe trolls will be watching me. I never thought when I entered this, of course I've taught at universities and now I'm doing more media. I never thought this job is going to be so quote unquote exciting. Getting death threats, your partner being attacked, your mother being attacked because you said something a little bit critical of the president. The propaganda machine of Duterte is impeccably impressive.
Right.
And a lot of people involved in that were actually part of mainstream media in the past. I'm not going to name names, but you can research on this. Oxford University did a great study on this. And when the study from Oxford came out, Oxford website got trolled. That's how powerful their propaganda machine is. I don't think Trump has anything close to that.
So, there's some questions here which I will weave into what I was going to ask you. So, a couple of things. So there's this one question here. Duterte's oldest daughter recently took a political position. Do you think they are forming another political dynasty? Actually, I think you can. I mean, aren't they already in power in Davao? And they were kind of taking
Yeah,
turns.
I mean, one son is the vice mayor, the
Yes.
daughter is the mayor, and
Right.
he at some point he was the congressman. So
Yes.
they're essentially the top guys in the big boss of Davao. There's no question about
So,
that. Yeah.
and going up from there, I mean, doesn't that kind of signal more of the same?
Well, this is how they presented themselves. They come from the lower rungs of the elite, and they're not part of Imperial Manila elite. That was very important. So no one questioned whether Duterte comes from a political dynasty. And the other thing is that Duterte loves to show his humble home, right? Which didn't even have air conditioning until Prime Minister Shinzo Abe had to visit, right? So most Filipino politicians, I won't say most, but a significant number of Filipino politicians are shameless about their wealth, and who knows where the wealth came from, right? In fairness to Duterte, except his beautiful motorbikes, he lives a relatively humble lifestyle, which people relate to. Now, we can debate about secret bank accounts and all of that. That's a whole different debate, right? I don't have an evidence to say anything on that. But the reality is that if you look at the outer, kind of experience or view of Duterte, he is actually one of the most simple living mayors we have seen when he was mayor of Davao. So when he projected himself as one of the people, it looked authentic, especially when you compare him to other people who were, wearing, all sorts of branded clothes and had Porsches and all of that and had perfect English intonation and all of that. So he was believable during elections.
So I kind of want to challenge that a
Yeah.
little bit. So, so you mentioned bad manners, and in a way, you could say that bad manners is a sign of protest.
Yeah.
I don't like this. I'm not going to abide by your rules. I will do something different. But at the same time, to what extent is that a strategic move versus just plain bad manners? You know what I mean? It's where you're projecting authenticity, great,
Yeah.
but then, for example, Trump here, he says he's for the
Yeah.
people, but a lot of his backers are very rich.
Yep.
I don't know specifically who the backers of,
Yeah.
of Duterte is, so I don't want to make that
Right.
straight comparison. But then there are people who benefit from him being in office. So, so my question is, how different is it really when it comes down to the substance
Yeah.
of democracy, of how local politics works?
Well, without a question, Duterte is an authentic populist. I
Okay.
mean, just look at his videos 20 years ago, he was still cussing.
Okay.
What kind of interests me is the cuss that he uses all the time, the PI word,
Okay.
right? Which means son of a something. Interestingly, 2 years ago, a movie came out called General Luna, which was the story of this Filipino general who was like the last military genius who was fighting against
Right.
Americans. And whenever the Filipino soldiers didn't want to fight, he would say, PIU, you go there. you
I
fight."
see.
So when and that clicked a lot with people because the because that General Luna was seen as a patriot who was eventually killed by the other Filipino revolutionaries who either wanted to make a deal with Americans or didn't appreciate his genius. So in a way, his usage of PI actually also taps into that General Luna kind of thing. I don't know if he did that strategically, but if ever he chose the PI, there are many cuss words you can use in Filipino, right? Latinos will understand some of them, of course. A lot of P words. So I'm not saying that it's entirely like not non-calculated,
Right.
but there's some consistency in terms of Duterte's behavior.
Okay.
I mean, the same way that Trump treats everything like reality show. It has to come from somewhere inside,
Okay.
right? We may not agree with them. We may think they're
Yeah.
shallow people, but there's some basis to that we have to appreciate them.
Okay, and before I go to some of the other questions related to that, because everyone is saying, he's still very popular, and you have said that he's still very popular despite all of these other criticisms. My question to you is, which would turn it on its head, is what would undermine that popularity? What
Right.
would seriously undermine it?
Yeah. I think you alluded to that. I wrote a piece for Law Institute in Australia recently, and the title is Putting Duterte's Popularity in Perspective. Because I think it's one of the most misunderstood things. Of course, first of all, you can be a populist and not necessarily popular. Trump
Exactly.
is a case in point. Populist meaning, oh, I'm the voice of the people, I'm going to save the country, we're against the elite. But his approvals are not really good in the case of Trump. In the case of Duterte, yeah, he has impressive numbers, 70, 80%, among the highest in the world. At some point, he was almost exactly the same as Vladimir Putin, his hero. But let's put that into context. I always say in tropical countries, we have long honeymoons. The same thing applies in politics. If you look at surveys, all Filipino presidents had very high approval ratings until their second or third year in office. Benigno Aquino went down in office with 56% approval rating. Despite all the mishaps that Aquino was definitely not a perfect president. He made major mistakes. At some point, I wanted him to resign over the Mama Sapano issue.
Right.
So for me, it's also a question of political culture. And the other thing is, you had many presidents who got very low share of vote, like Ramos, 26.5%. And then immediately when he became president, he got a net positive of 70% plus.
Right.
Duterte went from the lowest trust rating before he won, and then when he won, he went up. It's what I call winner takes all political culture. So that's one thing. Whoever wins, we're going to support him, even if we hated him.
We all love a winner.
And the balm of unity and all of that, right? And then the second thing is we are very patient people, probably over patient and forgiving. First of all, you have Marcos
Yes.
now in the cemetery of national heroes. Some may like it, some may not. I'm neutral on that question, but still, it's mind-boggling for a lot of people. The other thing is, ERAP, Joseph Estrada was kicked out of power to a people power in 2001. He was a convicted plunderer. He gets pardon on the condition he doesn't run for office. He runs for presidency in 2010, almost won.
Yes.
And then he ran for mayor. He's now the mayor of Manila. A convicted plunderer is now the mayor of Manila and almost defeated Benigno Aquino. Aquino was kind of like, there was a divine intervention, right? The mom died, there was kind of sympathy among others. But he almost got defeated by Joseph Estrada, who barely spent anything. That should tell you about the forgiving nature of the Filipino people. But the other question you have to ask is, okay, 70% is high quantitatively, but quality matters, especially to populists. Because populists' power is based on their ability to mobilize people. If they cannot bring people, warm bodies on the streets to intimidate their critics and the oligarchs or other established interests, then those numbers do not have any basis. So the other question I'm asking is that can really Duterte bring hundreds of thousands of people out? Because Hugo Chavez could do that for a very long time. And for me, Hugo Chavez is the gold standard and of course, how things could go wrong, but also a gold standard of how you can pull off this kind of populist mobilization. I have some doubts about how many people Duterte can still bring out. So there's a question of enthusiasm level too. So you ask, half of my family voted for Duterte and all of that. So a year ago when I asked about Duterte, oh, the guy is going to save all our problems in 6 months. He's a manna from heaven, blah, blah, blah. Now, so how are we going after 2 years? Did he solve all the problems? Yeah, give the guy a chance. He's a bit old. He's a bit cranky. So it's different. The support has a different quality to it. And the quality is important because populists need to mobilize people. And remember, Duterte doesn't have a real political party. Erdogan had the AKP. Hugo Chavez had a huge movement of its own. Modi has a whole, BJP machinery. Duterte doesn't have a real political party. So there are also limitations to what he has to do. Nonetheless, the question is what could bring him down? The reality is that he's not vulnerable in a way that the business as usual. We saw that in the case of Trump, right? How many red lines did he cross? He still became the president. And the problem in the Philippines is that unlike the U.S., When Duterte won, essentially everyone defected to the president, right? The president comes from a party called PDP Laban, which was like 3 members in the Congress. Within 2 months, they had 300 members. So it's like Trump was representative of the Tea Party, and then the whole Republican and Democratic Party defected him, and only Bernie Sanders and a few other Democrats were the minorities.
Right.
That's essentially what happened in the Philippines. So out of 350 congressmen and all of that, 300 are with the president. In fact, the opposition, the Liberal Party, signed a non-aggression collaboration pact. So the opposition just evaporated almost overnight in the Congress. Supreme Court is interesting. Unlike US, the Senate has no say on the Supreme Court decision, and Duterte is going to appoint 12 out of 16 members of the Supreme Court. So essentially, checks and balances in the Philippines is, to put it mildly, in a state of hibernation. That's why it's the media and the military in the Philippines who are the last bastions of keeping the democratic system alive.
Which brings me to another question, right? Speaking of the military,
Jeez, so many questions. Yeah, let's go. Yeah,
and the opposition,
I'll be quick about this. Yeah.
and because there have been some reports that the DND and the military have been, a little bit more critical, perhaps not too public or too vociferous, but a little bit more critical in terms of the martial law that was declared in Marawi City, in terms of a lot of other things. Now, my question is, do you think for me, I think it is worrisome to be depending on the military to be the bastion of civil democracy. So, I mean, there are precedents for it where, you had the people power and the military sided with them, but at the same time, that creates some problems,
Of course.
I would think. So, but what is your perspective on that in terms of the military seemingly being the protector of democracy?
Yeah, so we know that the military has ousted already 2 presidents in the
Exactly.
last 3 decades, Marcos and Arab. So the people power were essentially civilian back coups. That's the technical term we have to use for that. We can make it look beautiful. It was people power. But the military was the game changer. They were the kingmakers. And then they could be queen makers, as some people would say. So Duterte knows that. And if there's only one institution he really respects or fears or whatever you want to call it, it's actually the military. Just to give you an idea, the Philippines today is one of the most militarized, democratically elected government. You have 7 heads of the Joint Chief of Staff appointed 2 positions of cabinet or sub-cabinet. 7.
Yes.
7. Even Trump doesn't have as many generals there inside his cabinet, right? And Duterte on many occasions said, for instance, when dealing with communists, which the military doesn't like, he said, I cannot give too many concessions. They could oust me. He just openly said that. And the military has actually almost veto power on major decisions, including, which is what makes Duterte very famous, Duterte said all of these things about to hell to America, to heaven to China and Russia. But the reality is that if you look today, our counter-terror cooperation with the U.S. is as good as ever, if not better.
Yes.
The foundations of our alliance with the U.S. is completely intact. And one reason is because the military is there. The military essentially is always reminding the president, this is indispensable. We have to maintain this kind of relationship. Even on China and on South China Sea, whenever Duterte soft-pedaled on the issue, the military took a tougher stance. So you have this internal kind of balancing equilibrium between the president and the military in terms of preserving the foundations of our alliance with the U.S. and also defending our territorial interests in the South China Sea. On the democracy part, well, I wrote an op-ed for New York Times a few months ago, not Duterte's personal army. My argument is there is some residual guilt about how the military was the reason why Marcos could stay in power for so long. And over the past 3 decades, the military went through this whole process of democratic mainstreaming and socialization. I have to do more ethnographic study to really back this up. I'm not going to claim that I have enough ethnographic study, but based on my interaction with people at the highest levels, at the middle rank, there is a realization that the military's ultimate loyalty is to the Philippines liberal democratic constitution rather than to the President of the Republic. That's a very important distinction we have to make. And that's why when the martial law was declared in Mindanao, I asked the defense minister, what are we going to be worried about this martial law? And the defense minister was very clear. This is not going to be what happened during the time of Marcos. And so far, they have been true to their words. The level of human rights violation with the martial law in Mindanao, it has been very limited. And it has allowed the military to actually crack down preemptively and more effectively on the slippery slopes of ISIS-affiliated groups. And the military has actually advised even against the declaration of martial law, but once it was in, they said, okay, we'll make the most use out of it, but they immediately released a guideline saying basic civil liberties will be respected, human rights will be respected, and courts will remain open. So the martial law we have right now is, if I can use the word, more humane, so I'm saying the track record of military so far is not as bad. Again, I'm not saying there have not been extrajudicial, crimes. There have been some unfortunate things happen, but overall, as an institution, the loyalty of the military to the liberal democratic constitution of the
And
Philippines.
that's largely because also of the professionalization of the military that
absolutely.
has been going on since, I guess,
Yeah,
like
and you have people like
1990s.
President Ramos, who was a former head of the military, who became a president, and now is advising Duterte as one of the most vocal proponents of the Philippines democratic regime, right? And he openly contradicts President
Right.
and criticizes President
Right.
Duterte. Yeah.
Right. So, what do you think? And this is always difficult, making predictions.
Yeah.
So, what will the next election bring for the Philippines? A return to more conventional politics, or another charismatic leader? Do you think?
Well, assuming there'll still be a next election, so you never know.
Don't say that.
No, I mean, because we are pushing for federalism,
True.
and that could change the timetable entirely. We may have a prime minister soon and a president, so it's still under debate if 2022 will be the next presidential elections. But clearly, I mean, look at the picture right now. One of the reasons I believe Duterte is still solid, maybe not the country, but he is solid, is because there's no clear opposition. Who is the leader of the opposition? I don't know. Is it Mr. Trillanes? Is it Senator De Lima? Is it the vice president? I think we are still yet to see someone who can match Duterte, have the same kind of feistiness, but also to have the kind of humanity and humane side or kind of sophisticated side that can create that kind of contrast. So we're yet to see that. And in absence of the opposition, I see in the coming years the Marcoses as a major force to reckon with. If anything, the Marcoses are getting closer to their dream of vindication, which is to go back to Malacanang and tell to the people, you made a mistake kicking us out in 1986, and now we're back, right? So the Marcoses are very close. There's discussion that Sara Duterte, the daughter, could run at least for vice presidency. So Marcos, Sara Duterte could be one tandem we're looking at. Some of the remnants of the past are still going to be in the game. I would say Grace Poe, the former presidential candidate, she could still run. She might run with current Foreign Secretary, Mr. Cayetano. So unfortunately, I'm not seeing much competition from the opposition. So Duterte could be actually just the beginning of a more significant shift in the Philippines direction. My worry about the Philippines is not that we will lose our democracy, is that we will lose our liberal constitutionalism. I think we could move very much in the direction of illiberal democracy, similar to Hungary or Turkey or Russia. But still, I think elections is something so visceral to Filipino people. Removing elections is just a big red line that I think no one wants to cross. So democracy will be there in terms of election, but whether human rights and civil liberties will be as much appreciated down the road, I don't know about that. I have doubts.
Just to inform the people, the Philippines has we have a pretty good turnout.
Oh yeah,
right?
very high, 70-80%. Yeah.
And I think I'm sorry, the United States is much lower.
Yeah, much lower.
Thank you.
We're among the highest in the world in
Right.
terms of turnout. Yeah.
So, changing tacks for a little bit. There are some questions, obviously, about the war on drugs, and there are two questions here. So, is the drug problem just a red herring, or is it as bad as Duterte has claimed? And what are the views of the Filipinos about the tactics taken in fighting the drug war?
Okay. I do not agree with critics of Duterte who say he completely, in a Chomskyan way, it was not a manufactured crisis. Okay, it's not. Drug is a problem.
Yeah.
In fact, when I was doing research for my book, I saw that there was a CNN report that in 2015 there were Sinaloa gang elements in Philippines who were caught. Triad of China is very much
Oh, yes.
there. So Philippines is really a shipment, transshipment for
transshipment.
international cartels. It's a reality. Duterte is not making this up. But are we going to be a narco state? No, absolutely not. We have nothing close to El Chapo or Pablo Escobar, right? So we're not there, thankfully. But things could get worse. Someone has to deal with this problem. Uh, I think the bigger problem in the Philippines is really crime, because the index crime really significantly increased in the past 4 years.
Right.
And I think the previous administration was not appreciative of the sense of insecurity of ordinary Filipinos. For some of us who live in more, cloistered residential area, you don't feel it. But if you're in a much more lower middle class area, you're scared of going home at 10 p.m., 11 p.m., losing your phones, burglary, theft. These things are very common things. So I think Duterte was tapping into something. And I blame the media also, because the media sensationalization in the Philippines is just unparalleled. I remember one of the first words I always hear when you open the 6 p.m. news is the word patay, which means dead. Dead, 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 every day. So the media sensationalization also fed into paranoia of people. So when Duterte came in, it was not too hard for him to convince that crime was a big issue. Nonetheless, the question is solutions. Is the solution this kind of give a carte blanche to the police force to just essentially eliminate whatever? No, of course not. As I always say, you cannot wage a holy war with unholy men. You have to make sure that your police forces are professional to the highest degree, and that you have internal checks and balances to make sure there's no single innocent life lost. And we know there's at least more than one innocent life lost. And that's unacceptable for at least people like me, right? There's no way of getting around it. What is public opinion? This is interesting. That's why surveys have to be properly analyzed. If you look at, so people were asked, do you support Duterte's war on drugs? Oh, absolutely, 70, 80%. This is where the numbers have been going. But people were asked, do you want the suspects alive? 90% said yes. When people were asked, are you scared to be a victim of extrajudicial killing? 70% said yes. So I said, the only way I can make sense out of this is to say, people agree with the president in principle, but disagree in method. And it was a matter of time for Duterte to change the method. And it seems he's moving in that direction. So he's finally doing what everyone should do, which is make the Drug Enforcement Agency in charge of this, not the National Police. Because the National Police is not equipped with the necessary training for that.
Is that he did recently say that he was transferring the war on drugs not to the from the police to the Philippine Drug Enforcement Agency. Is that due to his realization that he couldn't finish it in 3 months, or are there other reasons for that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not holding back my breath, because earlier this year when a Korean businessman was killed, allegedly by police forces, Duterte apologized and he suspended the operations, the so-called tokang, which means in Bisaya language, knocking on the door. But it came back after 5 months. So who knows? Maybe he'll bring it back again. I mean, this is the thing. Populists always have this kind of a favorite trick they want to play. So this is the favorite policy of Duterte. So I hope it doesn't come back again, but I won't be surprised if it comes back. But in the meantime, clearly there was some element of backlash after the killing of Kian de los Santos and a number of teenagers. That really, touched people somewhere. So I saw people who were very fanatically supportive of the president suddenly were having second thoughts. And the president realized that, and the president came on national TV and said, I'm sorry, I think that was extrajudicial killing. That was unprecedented. So something seems to have changed, right? And it's even on social media, regardless of survey, you can also see that the tone is changing. The other thing is surveys are very clear. What are the top 3 issues to Filipino people? Bread and butter, guts issue, employment, poverty, health. These are things that people care most about. So I think because Duterte won on an anti-crime campaign primarily, he had to put on a show. He had to do something. So I was not surprised that he really meant it when he said, there will be blood, that there will be. But this is where he's entering towards the second half of his second year. So now he has to look at the other major issues in the country, more complicated issues. And that's why you have to watch Dutertenomics and other non-drug war-related kind of policies of Duterte to see where this is going.
Including his infrastructure promise, right?
Yeah,
That
which
it
is
will
under
be the new
Dutertenomics.
age of infrastructure. So, turning to foreign policy, the question is, to what extent is the Philippines actually veering towards China and leaving the United States? And also, what do you think we can expect from the visit of President Trump to the Philippines in November this month, right?
Yeah, November 30, I think they're gonna
And
meet on the gala in
yeah,
ASEAN.
yeah, and the Philippines is going to be the last leg,
Yeah.
the last stop of the president. And I just recently heard some people saying, might that be a problem because
Yeah.
the exhaustion factor for for the
Yeah.
American presidents. So, could you talk a little bit about what can we expect and how serious or how close does Duterte want to be with with China versus the U.S.?
Yeah. Well, very quickly, I have covered this more than anything else. In my book, I call it Duterte's Art of the Deal, right? Under Duterte's Art of the Deal, essentially what we're seeing is revolution and not revolution. What is the revolution part? There is a revolution part. He transformed what I call a special and sacred relationship into a transactional relationship. Sounds familiar, right? In the past, our presidents and our leaders, whenever they made a major decision, there was this inherent calculation. What will America think about our decision? So leftists will call it internalized colonialism,
Yes.
right? Now, this is public. I cannot give certain confidential information, but I had certain confidential information that suggested to me that our leaders never made any major decision without considering what America would have thought. Sometimes we are even more sensitive than what America probably would be sensitive to, right? So Duterte came in and made that special sacred relationship, some would even say subservient relationship, into a transactional one.
Right.
So depends on the issue. On counterterrorism, who can offer me the most? Oh, Americans are there. Okay, I'll be nice to you for now. Australians, nice. On economics, who can offer me the most? Americans, not very useful. Let's be nice with the Chinese and the Japanese. So he has made a special relationship very transactional, not so special anymore. I mean, the idea of cussing at the American ambassador, at the president of U.S. were unthinkable. But now, it's pretty normal. American bashing, I hear it every day. Sometimes I talk to taxi drivers who recognize me, and it's like, am I in Manila or in Amman or some Middle Eastern country? They kind of, oh, how dare America criticize us for 10,000 dead? They killed 1 million Iraqis. These are the things I never heard before. Now, interestingly, again, going to survey. So when people are asked, who is the most favored nation? America easily on top, right? Who's the least favored? China easily in there. But that's not the end of the story. People were asked, do you find America a reliable partner in the South China Sea? 50% were saying no or undecided. So Duterte did not convince America is bad, but he's convincing more and more people that the U.S. is unreliable. 47% said they're okay with Russia and China developing closer ties. So Duterte is kind of also tapping this pragmatic side of Filipino mindset that we like America more than China, but China is the future. This is so Duterte is essentially the harbinger of a post-American order in the region, and as the leader of ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, he has been purporting this. Now, very quickly to the visit to Trump, I don't really think Trump is going to get any deliverables in South Korea when they're very angry at him. I was just in South Korea a while ago and talked to some senior officials. In Japan, I'm not sure he's going to get much. In China, I'm not sure. But in Philippines, that's going to be the big bang. I'm expecting a convivial hobnob between Duterte and Trump in Manila. I won't be surprised. I'm willing to bet a lot of money on this, that you're going to see Trump doing the Duterte fist together with Duterte.
How about karaoke?
I'm not sure if any of them have, No, but the problem is that Trump likes golf. I'm not sure if Duterte can play golf. But for sure, there's going to be a lot of pictorial. And why? Duterte's essentially message right now is the West and the world doesn't care about human rights. It's all about strategic interest. He was very open about that. He said, when I meet the leaders, Rex Tillerson, Julia Bishop, they don't talk about human rights. Everyone talks about counterterrorism, etc. So he's presenting himself as a power broker who has to be dealt with on his own terms. Kind of like a non-aligned leader, independent leader. So they're going to make sure they get that kind of picture with Trump and show that the most powerful men in the world, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, Trump are all endorsing Duterte. And to say the opposition, you're hopeless. All the big boys are behind me. And Trump loves it. Duterte loves it. He said, Trump called me to talk to Xi Jinping, to talk to Kim Jong-un. He loves to talk about that. On the part of Trump, why would he like to do that? The Trump logic, it would be this. Obama incompetent Democrats lost a key ally. I'm going to win them back. That's how good I am. So the Trump message will be, I'm winning back estranged allies. This is because of my personal diplomacy. So both of them have a perfect reason to have the most trending selfie and convivial hobnob in human history. So I'm very prepared on November 4th. I'm going to get called from all media just talking about their selfie together. Forget about, and this is it. When Trump was set to meet Duterte, the State Department said, oh, no, this is not about Duterte and all. This is about attending the East Asia Summit and all. Guess what? He's not going to stay a few more hours to attend East Asia Summit. Clearly, he's going to go there to really meet Duterte. I think it's really being with Duterte. That is the most enticing thing for Trump. And Duterte knows that, and he loves it. And I perfectly predicted that because I was in New York when Trump won. And the question I got from media, from Christy Liu and in CNN and others was, how do you think things are going to go? I said, things are going to go fantastic. And one country that played an important role, we're discussing this, is Japan. Shinzo Abe is like the middle brother trying to put the big brother and the small brother together. So Shinzo Abe met Trump immediately in Trump Tower. They had good talk. When Shinzo Abe came in January to Philippines, he said to Duterte, don't worry, he's one of us. And then Duterte said, tell to Trump, we're okay. So when Abe came here to Florida, met Trump. So Abe is now a power broker, really. Japan has emerged as a major fulcrum right now. But it's a totally different talk we can have in future.
Uh, and in terms of U.S.-Philippines, U.S.-China-Philippines relations, I think that as a relatively small power, the Philippines does need a variety of partners because you really don't want to be over-reliant on one. And there is evidence that the United States is not going to be very reliable when it comes to addressing challenges in the South China Sea, especially on the part of the Philippines. Now, my only question is, to what extent can the Philippines guard against trading one overdependence for another overdependence?
Exactly. Right. Yeah. I
So-
mean, neither West nor East, right? That should be the
Right.
slogan. If you really want an independent foreign
Exactly.
policy. Now, the problem is that there's a gap between Duterte's language and his policy. Or there's a gap between what President Duterte says and what the Duterte administration does. Again, I know it sounds familiar here in the U.S., but that's very much, acutely palpable in the case of the Philippines. So President Duterte actually personally is not really fond of Americans. He really didn't have much experience of dealing with the Chinese. He loves the Japanese the most. That's his personal feelings, right? Now, the reality is that the Americans also are partly to be blamed for someone like Duterte to come in and have some gravitas when he says Americans are unreliable. I mean, I love Obama on so many levels. He's an inspiring figure for me, but I was very critical because, President Obama says pivot to Asia, ironclad commitment, and then when he was asking Manila, is America going to stand by the Philippines under the Mutual Defense Treaty in an event of conflict with China? Very clear question, twice, by my friends. He said, oh, we're not going to fight over a bunch of rocks. Bunch of rocks. He dismissed bunch of rocks, what many Filipinos see as part of their national territory.
Right.
And there's a feeling that we stood by America, First World War, Second World War, Cold War, every single major conflict, we were there with America. Now that we really need you and we're up against China, you're wishy-washy on this and you're dismissive of this. This is why even I was alienated by the language of the Obama administration. We went the extra mile to confront China. We filed an unprecedented arbitration award. The moment it came out, President Obama sends Susan Rice, not to Manila, but to Beijing to calm tensions in Beijing. Because Beijing, well, they're victims because they were just declared as an outlaw. This is the problem I have. The Obama administration raises expectations and then it crashes it. In short, I felt we were being led on, to put it in romantic terms. So it was very easy to come to hell with Americans. Let's just make a deal with China.
And that has been a trend in the U.S. administration over several governments in the United States, where they would would provide ambiguous statements on whether or not protecting the Philippines in the South China Sea is part of the MDT.
Well,
It
strategic
goes on and
ambiguity
on.
is supposed to be strategic in the sense that it has to have desirable outcome on the ground. I see only ambiguity, no strategy here.
Yeah.
Did the strategic ambiguity of America on the, for instance, question of Scarborough Shoal decrease tensions between China and US? No. Did it prevent China from coming in? No. If anything, China could really move into Scarborough Shoal soon. So my problem is that you cannot keep on hiding behind the beautiful phrase strategic ambiguity to justify inaction.
Right.
We needed the Americans since 2012 in South China, and we feel we didn't get the support we have. And it really shocks me. A country like Egypt, which has no clear external security threat, gets $1 billion in aid. They get Abrams tanks, F-16 fighters. Philippines, we get tens of millions at most, and their Vietnam-era technology or retrofitted versions. I feel it's unfair. So when I have officials from US telling me, well, you know, Egypt, Jordan, these countries have special security needs. We were up against China, the second most powerful military in the world, without a question. What was Jordan against? ISIS? I mean, why would they need F-16 fighters or Abrams tanks? We need those kinds of things. We need F-16 fighters. We need that. So I think we were really taken for granted. I don't blame America because our leaders were not asking enough. So I hope under Duterte we can get more. And to be honest, I think the Philippine military kind of is okay with that part because under Duterte, if you look at the Marawi operation, everyone helped us. The Americans gave us special forces and assistance. The Australians helped us. The Russian, Chinese, everyone is helping us. That's why sometimes I'm being accused of being Duterte's spokesman because to be real, the Philippines right now, you're perfectly alluded to this. We're in a strategic sweet spot. Right. We can get all of these benefits. What I will advise is, and I will give the same advice in terms of relationship, when you play others against each other, at some point you're going to get played. So Duterte has to be careful about this game of playing China against each other. This cannot go on forever. At some point, there should be some red lines. At the end of the day, if things go south in the South China Sea, we only got one insurance policy. Not the best one in the world, but that's called our mutual defense treaty with U.S.
We have a very limited time left, so I think I want to ask this question from the audience, which kind of goes back full circle to the beginning of Filipino political culture and the conditions under which Duterte came to power. It says, what is it going to take to dismantle the patient and forgiving nature of the Philippines?
Jeez, I'm not really culturati in terms of like understanding cultural factors, but it's, you know, we always joke, we got the, you know, perfect, you know, in terms of colonial legacy, we got the worst possible combination, right? We got Spanish and American, right? So we got corruption from Spain and the efficiency from Americans, right? So, and you could use all other sorts of negative traits we have, unfortunately. So we have this long-term maldevelopment in terms of our institutions that I think will take a long time for us to correct. You know, I think Catholicism is a great culture, but unfortunately, some people are using, you know, faith as a basis to forgive any kind of wrong. And I think forgiveness has to have limitations. And the reality is that even if forgiveness has to have limitations, forgiveness shouldn't mean forgetfulness. And my problem is that forgiveness and forgetfulness among us Filipinos sometimes is interchangeable. So you want to forgive the Marcoses, but don't forget what happened during that time, right? And vice versa for everyone. My problem is that sometimes people also tend to forget what happened. So essentially, in Philippines, sometimes you have parallel universe, whereby in one universe, Marcos was the best president ever. In fact, there was a fake news whereby Duterte was voted as the best president in the solar system. I thought that's the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life. And then I checked the comment section. Apparently, millions of people believe that. So,
on Earth?
Solar system.
Okay.
Solar systems.
Okay.
Apparently, human beings were there, like Shinzo Abe, President Shinzo Abe. So it was a thought, but it works, you know. So when people say fake news, you know, they blame candidates, they blame, you know, people in Macedonia making fake news, but also blame people who are willing to accept this fake news and embrace it. There are people who know it's a fake news, but because it makes them emotionally happy, they're okay with that. You know, you got your own fake news called CNN, we got our fake news called CNN #TV or something like that, right? So, cliche, right? But you need massive education campaign here. The problem with the argument of education campaign is there's also this very concerted effort of attacking anyone who goes against the grain as being biased. That's why for people like me, it's very important for me to show that I'm willing to reach across the, both sides of the fence. Because the moment you're not seen as neutral, which is almost impossible, but you have to try to, no one is going to listen to you, right? You had situation whereby you have to give basic facts. Like, by the way, on Earth, I don't know about parallel universe, this is the job, for instance, of the Commission on Human Rights. It's not the job of the Commission on Human Rights to help you if your boyfriend left you, right? Because there was a hashtag, nasaan ang Commission on Human Rights? Where is the Commission on Human Rights? So one of the twisted arguments was, oh, the Commission on Human Rights is there to protect the warlords and criminals against prosecution. Right? Or why is the Commission on Human Rights only focusing on Duterte's drug war, not focusing on, I don't know, some kid got bullied in some yard or something like that? So the problem is that I think the public has to be more discerning. And for me, Duterte, in many ways, is also a blessing because he just exposed the rotten nature of our political system and the massive amount of unfortunate lack of proper discernment among us on all classes. This is not about the poor versus the rich. I think all of us Filipinos, we have to do a better job of, understanding the other side and understand what is the root of the problem. My biggest disappointment right now is that no one talks about the real issue in the Philippines. The real issue in the Philippines is, yes, crime and all of that, but the solution to that is to invest in the capacity of the judicial and penal system. I'll just give you numbers, and I know these numbers by heart because it shocked me when I saw it. A single judge in the Philippines handles 644 cases per year. Filipino prisons have a 400% overcapacity. Bilibid, which is our Alcatraz, has a 2,000% overcapacity. More than 50% of inmates are pre-trial inmates, and the judiciary just gets 0.76% of the national budget. That's scandalous underinvestment. You want to solve crime? You want to solve drugs? Invest in the capacity of the state. Unfortunately, this is not a sexy discussion. I post selfies on my Facebook, I get probably sometimes 800 likes. I post about these things, I barely get 80 likes. So my challenge is how to make it sexy. Probably I put my selfie and then I put like 5 facts about the Philippines judicial system. So thanks to the trolls, I made my Facebook page. I have 100,000 followers, but that's nothing. I'm against trolls with millions of followers. So it's a competitive field. But I realized, thanks to the trolls, I came out of my cocoon. In the past, I thought all you have to do is to write scholarly books, go university. That doesn't work anymore. In short, what I tell my friends, you want to talk about education, you have to be ready to get down and dirty, to talk to people across the other side, to be insulted at, right? To have people demeaning you and attacking you. You have to take that risk. We cannot sit here in a comfortable or conditioned place and lecture to people and say they're wrong. We have to really go to the grassroots. That's why I've been trying to work on my Filipino more. Many people laugh at my Filipino because I have a kind of slang, because I speak so many different languages. But I said, at least I'm trying. What are you doing? Do you think people would appreciate our English? No, most people don't appreciate English language anymore. It's an elitist language, right? So you have to speak the language of people. I try to speak the language of the North, the Ilocanos too, And I think sometimes I realize all people want, so-called ordinary people want, is just you pay attention to them. Just care to listen to their stories. And I think this is the problem of us liberals in the Philippines. We're so good at giving lectures, taking the moral high ground, but we're never willing to get down and dirty because we feel we're too good for that. And I think this was a wake-up call for me. So I think you shouldn't only be liberal, you should also go to the grassroots and engage the public and listen to their stories and their frustrations. Don't tell them you're wrong or you're stupid. That's not the way forward, right? So my strategy is Socratic, right? When I talk to people, I don't give answers. I just keep on asking questions until they get pissed off and say, yeah, I'm not sure where that came from. Probably it was fake news, right? So I think we have to do more Socratic approach and have that kind of dialogue with people at the risk of getting cussed at and get death threats and all of that. It's fine. We have to do that. So it's not easy anymore to be an academic or media person. But exciting times.
And on that note, I would like you to join me in thanking Richard Heydarian for a very fascinating and
Thank you very much
interesting
for coming.
discussion. Thank you so much.
Salamat. Thank you very much. That was great.